Hey everybody, Melissa Mackenzie, publisher of the American Spectator, here on the Spectacle with Scott McKay, the Raging Cajun
Oh,
from
don't do that. That's
Louisiana.
James Carville. Don't do that to me.
I'm doing
I,
it to you
I
because
want nothing to do with that.
I'm doing it to you because this is going to be a pro-Texas podcast and you're going to have to like it.
Okay.
That's what's happening.
Okay.
That's what's happening. So for all of you who don't know, I live in Texas. Scott, of course, is from Louisiana. And we both kind of know what's going on politically in our states, as well as paying attention to national stuff. Scott, much more so than me for Louisiana. He really is an expert. I am a tangential paying attentioner type person here in Texas. Part of that is because our legislature is only in session for 6 months every 18 months. And so we don't have a continuous local spectacle to pay attention to. There's a lot of backroom dealing in the time off from session, but it is like drinking from a fire hose for 6 months every 2 years. And so so we have a part-time, no full-time, legislature in a very, very big state with very, very big issues. So I went over yesterday and Monday for the inauguration here in Texas. And so I went on Monday to go to there was a special mass for public officials. The governor is Governor Greg Abbott, reelected for his third and final term limited, and he's Catholic. And so the weather was unseasonably warm and dry and gorgeous. Waiting outside the church and waiting outside, sitting outside for the inauguration was absolutely beautiful. Sometimes you're freezing to death outside, sitting in the rain and cold. But anyway, it was interesting, Scott, to me, because the message, because we're a Republican dominated state, just like California is Democrat dominated, any one party state, you will tend to have people in your own party start acting like the opposite party. Or they're people who were in the opposite party. About 10 years ago, we had just 50 Democrats switch to Republican because they just simply couldn't get elected as Democrats in Texas anymore.
Yeah, we have the same thing here.
Yeah. And so they're still in their heart of hearts Democrats in kind of mind and thinking. And then we had a terrible Speaker of the House. He who shall not be named, he's not there anymore. And I'm not going to say his name. He's terrible. And basically, he was ticked off because the Freedom Caucus in the Tea Party caucus was what it was here in Texas back then, did not want him to be speaker because he was terrible. And what he did is he redistricted Republicans out of their seats and gave them to Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then triangulated against his own party to get Democrat agendas fulfilled. All right. So when people hear about, a state like Texas having all Republicans, well,
right, that
doesn't necessarily mean something always good. Well, that joker is gone. And some of the deals like Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick made. So the other thing to know about Texas, for those of you who are not in Texas, is the Lieutenant Governor is the head of the Senate in Texas and is very powerful. He sets the agenda and he decides what gets out of committee, all of that stuff. It's very powerful. George W. Bush was in that position before he became governor. Rick Perry was in that position before he became governor. And so the governor is relatively weak in Texas. Now, one of the ways that Perry, and I'm giving all this preamble to set up what I'm going to talk about because it was pretty momentous what happened in the last 2 days. Governor Perry really strengthened the governorship, because he basically told his own party he was about as conservative libertarian as you can be. and he would just veto one after another the budgets they sent him. He would be like, no, we're not doing that. Like, he was totally for the taxpayer. I remember one year when the GOP wanted to raise taxes. Yes, that's true, in Texas. And he was like, are you insane? People do not vote for Republicans to raise taxes, right? So no, we are not doing that. Cut the budget. Well, that got everybody grumbly, but it actually saved the GOP in Texas. Had they done what they'd wanted to do, it would have been catastrophic. So I give all of this background to say that up until this session, the GOP has been kind of divided. The governor will have his priorities. The lieutenant governor will have his priorities. The House, the Speaker of the House will have his priorities, and sometimes they're not anybody's priorities. This was the first time that I have experienced in Texas where everybody's priorities seem to align. And I think what has done it is, one, is these guys are term limited out, but two, the contrast with all of these woke states is incredible, right? Like, and it has scared the ever living daylights out of average Texans who are used to a certain way of having the state. And so the like the prayers from they had a bishop from Fort Worth, they had the pastor of a church real near my house, actually, in Montgomery, who's the pastor of the Cowboy Church. He gave one of the best prayers I've ever heard. But I would say that the unifying theme of these things was, hold up. Are we a nation of free speech? Are we a state of free speech, of the freedom to practice religion, the ability of parents to run their houses the way they want to, you know, because there's this kind of standoff that's coming between the state and the family. And it's in some places already, the family's already lost, like in California. And so it was really interesting to see over 2 days the different politicians who spoke, including the governor and lieutenant governor, some of the House members and whatnot at the inauguration, and be united. And be united not just on the economic things, which has always been good in Texas, but finally, and you might be, if you're outside Texas, you're like, what do you mean finally? But finally doing school choice. It was the Republicans who messed that up in the last 2 sessions. It was the Republicans who fooled around with the state school board and didn't understand how critical it was for Texas to hold the line on all of the textbooks and the curriculum and everything else that's being kind of monkeyed with by these different, you know, histories being rewritten. And so our Texas legislature, Dan Patrick did this, actually weakened the ability of the state school board to make these modifications, right? Mm-hmm. Well, parents are having a canary because over COVID, everybody started paying more attention. And already this, you know, the homeschool movement, excuse me, was really strong in Texas. But now it's like the public school parents and everybody's like kind of paying attention. Hearteningly, everybody was on the same page. I don't think, if this session goes forward like I think it's going to, Texas will be protected for a while and move in the conservative direction instead of the liberal direction, which is what even under Republicans it had been doing. I know that sounds insane, but it's been particularly offensive because our country or our state, you know, should be conservative. You know, that's who we vote for. That's what the people moving here want. And the other interesting thing, I don't know if you saw, but Texas has a 32 billion with a B surplus. Guess how in debt California is? Their deficit is 24 billion.
Right.
I'm sorry, but that kind of sea change in money makes a difference. So in Texas, they're lowering property taxes and shoring up infrastructure, because the numbers were in some ways truly frightening. They expect 20 more million people to be born, grow, and move here between now and 2050.
Right.
And Texas, even though under Perry, he made infrastructure a huge priority because we had those droughts. And so all of this money went to creating like rainwater capture, and
y'all did a bunch of reservoir work.
a bunch of reservoirs, all of that stuff. And it's barely keeping up, Scott, because we've had so many people. And people are talking about the grid, having problems with the grid in Texas. It's not because of the weather. Yes, that contributes to it. We just have so many people coming so quickly that keeping up with it it's just people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you had 350,000 people a year, which is what Texas added last year.
Yeah.
And that's a decent sized city every year of new people moving in, which is, it's homes, it's schools, it's hospitals, it's roads, it's drainage, it's all these different things. And when you have cities that grow, the way Austin has, 30 years ago, Austin was 500,000-600,000 people, and now it's a metro area of over 2 million.
Right.
Which is just, that's a staggering demand on resources of a place, to be able to have affordable housing and all these different kinds of things. Texas is a much more competent place to handle that kind of growth. You can look at California's example of how they handled that growth really at the beginning. And the big push of California's population growth began when Reagan was governor. Mm-hmm. And then Reagan left office in 1975, I think it was, or 1974, January of 75, I think it is. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a Jerry Brown that came after Reagan or somebody like that. And like they said, oh, well, we're not gonna, it was an anti-development type platform. Oh, we're going to stop building stuff. Well, the people kept coming. And so if you're not going to build, the infrastructure, especially in California, water infrastructure, if you're not going to build those things and people keep coming, then what happens is everything gets really expensive. And you have a whole bunch of people that are living in awful conditions. Because at the end of the day, I can't remember what show it was over the weekend. Wasn't one of the weekend radio shows that's like nationally syndicated, and they were talking about homelessness in LA and San Diego. Mm-hmm. And it was a perfectly reasonable perspective this guy had. He was just like, you choose to live in one of the most expensive places in the world to live. Okay. Nobody owes you a place to live in San Diego, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you can't afford to live in San Diego, you don't get to be homeless in San Diego, right? Which is perfectly reasonable. The problem is that if your city is in demand, okay, you have to keep building houses in San Diego, even though you're like, oh, well, we don't want to do all this additional development. It's like, well,
or go up with apartments or something.
Well, that is the answer if you don't want to expand out into the desert or do whatever. Point is, if you want to be a pro-growth state, which means having a tax code that is pro-growth and having a business climate that is pro-growth and having a regulatory climate that's pro-growth, if you want that, then you're going to have to pay attention to the infrastructure that all these people moving in are going to demand. And Texas, I think, is one of the few places I've seen, at least in this country. There's some other places, if you look at Singapore and places like that, what they just we're way ahead on the infrastructure game because we're projecting what our population is going to be like in 25 years or whatever. Texas is one of the few places in America that's actually good at that.
And even still, they're struggling. I talked to, and I'm not going to say the guy's name, but there's a couple people who are in charge of bringing the grid up to, to handle it.
Right.
He was the most stressed guy that I talked to. Like
Well,
he,
350,000 people a year. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he was just like, I
That's a
felt
lot of
sorry for the
kilowatts you
guy.
got.
He was like, you know what I mean? Basically, the heat wave that we've had through January, you know, we had all this cold and really, really cold in December, has saved the power grid because it's moderate and people aren't using air conditioning as much and they're not using heat. And so like the thing is that I was just kind of blown away by the numbers and what's happening. And when you come into Austin, and this is true in outside Houston, it's true. Like going to Houston, when I first lived here 25 years ago, there was like vast nothingness between just, you know, north of the burbs of Houston all the way to Dallas. Now there's like no break. Like there's
stuff from Houston to College Station is it's suburbs.
Right. And then you go to Austin, and this is what Texas does that the blue states hate, but that has to happen. So you've got all these young professionals moving in. They don't have the money for big houses. They don't have the money for whatever. So you have these apartment complexes and these little salt box houses, popping up everything, like bare minimum. But it's a place that somebody can have ownership and start and buy a house and build their wealth.
Yeah,
and
they stopped building those in California in the 90s.
Right. And so like, you know, people are like, ew, a California go, ew. But for Texan people, it's a, you know,
it's a starter house.
It's a starter.
Yeah.
I mean, I had one of those. I had a starter house, and my husband and I at the time, we gutted everything slowly but surely as we could afford it and did the work ourselves, sold it at a gain. That's how you build wealth, you know? And so like I was encouraged, but it was like the one thing that I will say is that, you know, for over the past 25 years of Texas's growth, when I first came here, people were looking for a state with no state income tax, which Texas doesn't have, and lower regulations so they could start a business, right? Now, the new refugees from these blue states want that, but they also want to be assured that they'll have their religious freedom, that their children will not be indoctrinated in schools.
Right.
And this is a challenge in Texas because the infrastructure is there already and it's entrenched. And it means rooting out the CRT stuff, the DEI stuff, the baloney in schools, you know, in elementary schools. So there's a lot of work to be done. And but I'm happy. It's a good time. And the juggernaut that is the Texas economy is just mind blowing. I had no idea. They were reading off the data, and it was like, holy cow! If Texas at any point fails, I think it's over for the country. You know,
it's over for Western civilization.
Yes, it's over. I mean,
for Texas and Florida literally right now are what are holding up.
Yes, pulling
Western
it along.
civilization.
Yes.
I mean, from an economic standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, like literally that is, and I guess to a lesser extent, you can throw Tennessee in there too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I pay a lot of attention to state legislatures, particularly in red states, because there are so many good ideas that you can find floating through there.
Yeah.
And you know, for a long time, and it was particularly economic stuff, Texas was kind of the gold standard. I mean, that like, you know, the policies that were coming out of Texas were just off the charts.
Right.
But Tennessee and Florida are actually over the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years better.
Yes.
I mean, what they do in Tennessee is it might actually be better than Florida. Tennessee is phenomenal.
Well, let me cut you. I'm sorry to interrupt. And say one of the things. So I'm friendly with some of the governor's staff. Okay, I'll just say that so I can keep it broad, so nobody knows who I'm talking about. And one of them and I is a dear friend of mine. We were having a conversation about this very thing. And she was saying, well, I can't understand why people got so mad at Governor Abbott about the masking thing. And I said, no Texan wants to hear a story coming from Florida, coming from Tennessee, coming from anywhere but Texas, that Texas isn't leading the way on freedom and is the vanguard. And I said, it's offensive. And I was like, you don't know about it because you're in the mix of it. But I'm out here watching what other states are doing. And I don't want to hear that Governor DeSantis has done something we should be doing in Texas.
Right. I mean, like Abbott, I think, gets a little bit of a bum rap because of Ron DeSantis and Bill Lee. If those guys weren't around, Greg Abbott, like, oh, this guy's the best governor in the country.
Right.
But Bill Lee in Tennessee, and no, I'm not saying he's not good. I'm just saying, you know, Bill Lee and Ron DeSantis and both of them went in right around the same time, like 2018.
Right.
Those two guys were like, I mean, they came in, their first terms were just off the charts with the policy moves that they made. I mean, like, I go back to the CRT debate in Tennessee, which was 2 years ago now, I think it was. And I mean, they passed it was a CRT ban, okay?
Right.
And I mean, the backlash when that bill came out, all of the newspapers in Tennessee, you know, the Black Caucus, I mean, they, you know, Nathan Bedford Forrest rides again. Like, it was like the whole, I mean, they poured it on as thick as they could.
Right.
And the Tennessee legislature, which is like 3/4 Republican, okay?
Right.
Didn't care. Did not care. You could not. The Nashville newspaper makes it, the Tennessean writes, oh, these guys are a bunch of Klan members and whatever. And these guys are like, yeah, guess we're going to get our money's worth in. And they rammed that CRT bill through.
Right.
In a week. I mean, they just crushed it. And I mean, the yelling and screaming was over the top. And then that bill passed and Lee signed it. Done. I mean, done. That was it. You know, and now,
well, we had that 2 years ago too, Scott. Right. They passed the CRT, but the thing is like when we have guys, even in what's his face in Virginia,
Youngkin.
Youngkin.
Glenn Youngkin.
Yes, Glenn Youngkin. He's held the line. Like I gotta say, I'm a little shocked, but he has been holding the line on the education stuff.
That's what got him elected.
It's what got him elected.
Yeah.
And he's doing a great job. And I made the point that I don't want to be bested here in Texas by Virginia. That's a purple state. Right. No. So like, I do think that thank God though, right? Thank God for the, you know, what's happening. And because you're right. And the sense of like, if Florida, Texas, Tennessee, some of these states, if we fall, it's done. Right. Like, and the thing is like all the pastors and like the bishop's prayer and everything, they all were praying in those terms. Like, please, this is it. You know, this is it. And there is that kind of sense, which I finally, you know, it's like, I don't know why it's taken so long, frankly, for some of the conservatives and the Republicans to get where we're at, but they seem to finally be getting it. I'm hoping.
Well, I think and I've said this for a while, I think there's a generational shift within the Republican Party. Okay. Boomer conservatism, okay, is like the George W. Bush, Mitch McConnell flavor of it, which is, you know, U.S. Chamber of Commerce does no wrong. We're, you know, America's, you know, the business of America is business, and like that kind of old school, you know, where it's purely economic conservatism. We don't we'll pay lip service to religious conservatives, right? But we're never really going to fight on them because that's how we lose everybody else. And so you just surrender on the cultural issues, which emboldened the left, because the old school, you know, like liberals were pretty circumspect in retrospect about how much they would push on the cultural stuff.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that dam really started breaking in the 90s. But prior to that, like, you know, you didn't see people going, you know, full on for like left-wing cultural causes, whether it was a gay marriage thing
Oh,
or
right.
like they were careful about that
Safe,
stuff.
legal, and rare. They
Right.
weren't talking
Right.
openly
Like
about
there was not a
infanticide.
lot of cultural radicalism until the
Yep,
90s.
right.
My theory is that it was critical race theory, which was basically invented at Harvard Law School by a guy named Derek Bell, who was a mentor of Barack Obama in like 1992, I think is when he wrote the first critical race theory book. And
Yeah.
once they married critical theory to race, like that was when like, okay, now we're cooking with gas, right? Which apparently you're not supposed to do anymore. But so anyway, like, but it was really prior to maybe the mid 80s or so, or mid 90s or so. Like the left was, I mean, they would push, but it wasn't over the top crazy like stuff where you know, like we're you know, they're trying to normalize pedophilia now, and the rest of us are like, gross, right? But anyway, like, so to a large extent, when religious conservatives would talk about the culture war, sort of the boomer Bush Republican, you know, crowd, oh, you guys are, you know, y'all are like way out on a limb or whatever. And that was a credible argument that you could make. Right. I mean, you know, it was like, well, abortion didn't really ruin the country. So if we just sort of hold the line on that and not go on offense, we, you know, it's not icky and whatever. And like, you could make that argument. The problem is that because you didn't offer any resistance at all to the left during that time, they got more and more emboldened, and they started insinuating themselves into all of these different things. The schools being the most obvious deal. And it started with the universities, and conservatives did nothing whatsoever to push back on, you know, pre-wokeness. Before it was woke, it was politically correct, right? And they didn't push back on political correctness in the universities. And instead, you had all these, and you know, Texas was probably one of the worst offenders on this, was you had Republican legislators who got it in their head, look, all this money we've got, throw it into the colleges, okay? Because here's the deal. They're going to churn out a whole bunch of white collar, upper middle class people who are always going to vote Republican. And this is how the Democrats want to bring the immigrants in, and that's how they're going to change the electorate. We're going to change the electorate by putting everybody through college, right? The problem with that was that you did nothing to pay attention to what you were spending the money on. So you inflated the budgets of all of these, particularly public colleges, and in red states, this is like particularly a thing. And of course, the blue states were already doing this. And like they had way more money than they knew what to spend. There were only so many engineers you could train, right? So they took all this money and they created an African American studies program and a women's studies program and a gender studies program and all of these various different, you know, something studies curricula. And then they hired up a bunch of diversity coordinators and vice chancellors and provosts and whatever, people who like had nothing in the way of administrative skills. Like these were just like basically pencil pusher or paper pushers, but they had, you know, like they had an ideology. It was like, well, let's just hire up all the woke people because we've got the extra money to do it, and, you know, build this sort of faculty club culture that just gets more and more radical because there's grant money now that they can all get grants to study this and that. And all of a sudden, these universities become woke indoctrination centers on Republican money that came from state legislators in red states in large measure, but even in purple states, Republicans were all on board with paying this money into these colleges and not getting what they thought they were going to get out of it because they didn't pay attention. And to this day, you do not see Republican state legislators. If you want to go to the folks in Texas and push them for something, the answer is, okay, I want to audit these public universities and I want to see where the money's being spent. Right? I want to know how many, you know, provosts you have at Texas A&M and UT and, you know, all these other, like, I want to know how much of this money is being spent legitimately on woke indoctrination, because guess what? We're going to do a tax cut, and this is how we're going to pay for it, is we're going to start cutting your budget because you don't need the money if this is what you're spending it on.
Well, okay, so like if you look at the amount of this happens in two places where there's a ton of inflation. One is in healthcare.
Yeah.
So you have doctors and it's like a flat line, and the administration is like, boop.
Right.
Same way on college campuses and in high schools and stuff. You have teachers and professors like this, administration like that. And so you have all of these special interests. You have all of these DEI, different professionals, and it's all a scheme to employ leftists to indoctrinate your kids.
Absolutely.
I mean, and then you look at the fees that they're spending and where the fees go to. Mm-hmm. And it's a cornucopia of leftist causes that are being paid by the students' activity fees. So like, and that's just one thing. And then you have the actual textbook. So like, I was talking to someone who's an expert here in Texas on this. She was at one time on the state school board, and we're talking about how the AP exams, how none of that is being really looked into.
Oh, the AP exams are an exercise in wokeness these days. It's unbelievable.
Yes. Well, so like, who teaches the economics class? Who's the name on the econ AP class curriculum? Paul Krugman. So that guy is making a crap ton of money for having his name on the textbook and teaching baloney. The guy who's wrong about everything.
Chinese economics.
Yes, exactly. And so you've got all of these different sorts of lefties who are, it's just graft. And so there's so many ways that all of this has absolutely polluted. And now we've got a whole generation, because probably the last 10 years in particular, the years my kids have gone to school, have been the worst. And unless you have a psycho parent like me who say, no, that's not true. Nope. That's not what the Magna Carta said. Nope. Here's, I'm the Debbie Downer mom, who the kids are like, mom, and, but you have to, if you're not on top of it, your kids' brains are turning to mush.
Yeah. No, that's right. And I mean, and what you're seeing in a lot of these red states, that are, where there's still, the battle is still going on. Whereas in a place like a Colorado, for example, it's just over.
Yeah.
What you're seeing in a lot of red states is the parents have gotten active, and it's turned into, politicians are getting active. And over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a whole lot of this. And I have no doubt that Texas is going to be a leader. I think Louisiana may be shortly following suit, because there's a lot of movement toward this here. Look, like, if we can't save these institutions, K-12 education, for example, then we're going to dump it.
Right.
And, money follows the child education policy.
Yes.
Doing something totally different on higher education. Like, you're starting to see those conversations really taking place. Look at Florida. Ron DeSantis puts Christopher Rufo on the board of regents in Florida. It's like, the news media over there goes, absolutely, you can't put that guy. Who is he? And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't put the president of some freaking bank in Miami on the board of regents like I'm supposed to. I actually got a guy who knows about this stuff,
right,
and will do something about it,
right.
And of course that is ultimately the direction that a lot of this is going to go, which is you're going to start having subject matter experts getting appointed to some of these boards.
Yes.
Because, the old model of this is how you reward your campaign contributors, like, doesn't work anymore, when it's not just managing some institution that runs itself, because the institution's off the rails. And if you either have to save it or destroy it, but what you can't let it do is, continue to metastasize and do damage. So you go and you put a Christopher Rufo on the board of regents, and the guy goes to war against the woke idiots that run the colleges, right? And either he drags DeSantis down, which at this point can't happen, or he wins, and all of the woke idiots have to go because he gets them all fired. And like, this is you know, it almost sounds like an oxymoron to say this is what activist conservatism looks like,
Yeah.
which is no, we're going to roll this back. And you know, you started,
and it takes getting in. Yeah, it takes getting into the institution. We cannot from the outside make the change. Like we have to take on this beast. And the biggest problem on the right is the lack of courage.
Well, you know, the lack of interest too. Okay, like for example, I'm gonna draw on, because we're talking kind of state level stuff. I guess this is the state level podcast.
This is the state level podcast.
Yeah, I guess. So, like here in Louisiana, for example, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds of this, but so Bobby Jindal was the governor of Louisiana for 8 years. And at the end of his term, John Bel Edwards, the Democrat, won, and he's in his last year as governor of Louisiana now. And we're fixing to have a Donnybrook of a gubernatorial election this fall. So Jindal kind of was sort of a policy wonk, boy wonder. You know, he goes in office and, you know, he's going to make all this, you know, conservative change. And one of the things that he wanted to do was he wanted to turn LSU in Baton Rouge into a big economic generator. Jindal had worked for Mike Foster, who had been the Republican governor, not immediately before Jindal. But he had 8 years, and then Kathleen Blanco, the Democrat, was in for 4 years. And after she destroyed the Katrina recovery, she couldn't even run for re-election. And so Jindal basically went in with almost no opposition at all. So he wanted to do a lot of what Foster had done, which was to promote LSU as an economic development vehicle. Like, in other words, you know, get a bunch of smart people on that campus and like let it percolate, and then see how many businesses spin off out of that. And there've actually been some, you know, some notable examples. You know, if you've driven by a Raising Cane's, for example, the fried chicken tenders place, that's a Baton Rouge thing. That I mean, it was, you know, a bunch of people went to LSU and got started. Like, hey, you know what? Let's open up a restaurant right on the north gates of LSU, and let's serve greasy fried chicken tenders to the drunks coming from the campus bars. And it blew up, and it just so happens Raising Cane's is like really good. So like it's all over the country. And
it's
then
my kid's like favorite chicken place.
Oh, Raising Cane's is fabulous. Okay. And I'm not just saying that because it's from Baton Rouge, it's fabulous. So, and like another example of that is Walk-Ons is a restaurant chain that's like everywhere now. And that got started. The two guys that started Walk-Ons were walk-on basketball players at LSU. Jack Warner and Brandon Landry they created this restaurant chain. Drew Brees went and invested in it. Next thing you know, like they've got, there's a Walk-Ons everywhere. And it's, you know, it's a kind of an Applebee's type thing, but it's a sports bar themed deal. And it's fun. It's a fun place. I love Walk-Ons. Anyway, like that came from having a bunch of like really bright entrepreneurial people that got attracted to go to LSU. Mark Emmert, who just, I guess, finished as or is finishing as the chair of the NCAA, was LSU's chancellor. And he wrote the gospel about, here's how you create a really cool university. You have like great athletics, and you do all of these things and make the students really want to come there. And then you bring in professors in fields that are very economic development oriented. And this is how you can turn your university into this dynamo. Kind of like the Research Triangle in North Carolina generated a lot of economic development. You could say that about UT, and Austin has done that to a lesser extent. A&M, although most of it came to Houston. But I mean, you know, there's plenty of examples of how this. And so Emmert built the model to do LSU in that same vein. Okay. So Jindal came and said, okay, you know, we need to do something similar. And so they went out and they hired a search firm when they had an opening for the LSU president position. And they said, look, we want the next Mark Emmert. But the deal is they don't have a lot of Mark Emmerts running colleges. Okay.
No.
I mean, what you have is hardcore leftists. There's a different thing, and I know I'm dragging us into the weeds, but I think if you care about policy, this stuff is actually interesting. So the other thing that Jindal did, Louisiana has a scholarship program that pays for college tuition for bright kids. It's called the TOPS program. It's the Taylor Opportunity, I don't remember what the P is, scholarships, TOPS, all right? And Generally speaking, anybody who has the grades to get into LSU has already qualified for TOPS.
Oh, wow.
So essentially, if you're in state and you get into LSU, you pretty much get at least most of your tuition paid for. Okay. And so Jindal looked at that and he said, and Louisiana has 14 public four-year colleges, which is way too many. Like Florida has 14 with like 5 times the population. Okay. But this is because, you know, they built all these junior colleges in all the markets around the state, and the state legislators in those markets eventually found their way because there was oil money. Let's make Nichols State a university. And so like Thibodaux, Louisiana has this university that's had 6,000 students. It's like, what are we doing here? And the weirdest thing is, this is about as Catholic.
I'm just laughing because you're freezing up a little bit, but I'm just laughing thinking about Thibodaux because people are like, Thibodaux. If you've ever been to,
awesome little town. Okay, it really is.
But the emphasis on little, though.
It's little. It's 30, 40,000 people live in Thibodaux. Anyway, so they have all these little colleges, and it's impossible to consolidate them or get rid of them. It's impossible. And Louisiana is about as Catholic a state as you can get. And yet there's like one Catholic college in the whole state, which is Loyola.
Is that right?
What's that?
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. I mean, like Lafayette, Louisiana is a very Catholic place.
Right.
And there's tons of oil money in Lafayette. You would have thought that somebody would have put a St. Agnes University or something.
Sure.
And it was never done because there was a University of Louisiana at Lafayette there. And it's like a classic case of crowding out, right? You have all these public colleges. So anyway, you know, and a lot of these places are struggling. They're little bitty schools that, you know, it's like, it's basically a community college, but it's a 4-year school, and we're wasting all this money. And so this has been sort of a structural problem with higher ed. Jindal was like, okay, I can't just go bring a bill to get rid of Grambling State University, which we don't need, right? Like, I can't do it. It's impossible. I can't get rid of, you know, LSU and Alexandria, which has like 2,500 students. It's like, how can you run a public university with that? And Louisiana, right? It's actually Louisiana Christian now. It used to be Louisiana Colleges in Pineville, right across the Red River from Alexandria, which is a private school that's getting crowded out by the LSU, you know, what used to be a junior college. So he's like, all right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start funneling the money into TOPS, and I'm going to start dumping the general fund money to the universities. And so if you want your little whatever directional school to get funded, you've now got to be able to attract the TOPS kids who are the ones that ought to be going to college rather than just being some little kind of crip school for, you know, the local yokels who are going to go there and drink for a year and then go work offshore or whatever, right?
Right.
It's like, that's a waste of the state's money, so we're going to do it this way. Well, they didn't message it, all right? And because it didn't really poll that well. They knew it was good policy, but it didn't poll that well. So they just did it without talking about it. So the narrative then was that Bobby Jindal was destroying higher education in Louisiana because look at what he's done to the general fund money coming in. So they're looking for a new LSU president, and they go, you know, get the search firm, they bring in candidates or whatever, and they end up hiring this guy named F. King Alexander, which is he ended up at Oregon State, and they ended up firing him after that based on something that would happen at LSU. I mean, we all just called him F. King Alexander, which was very descriptive of what he was. But the deal was, this guy was at Long Beach State, and he was political, okay? Like the whole time he was at LSU, he was trying to get a job in the Obama administration. And he had written a bunch of white papers about how states have got to support higher education through their general funds. And I remember having a conversation a couple of years into this guy's tenure at LSU when he had sent the students to the state capitol to demonstrate for tax increases to pay for higher general fund spending at LSU. All right. And so I'm at some big confab, and I end up running into the guy who at the time was the president of the LSU Board of Supervisors. And this guy was distraught because he can't believe what LSU's, school president had just done. And I'm like, did you read his white papers? So what are you talking about? Like, the guy wrote 3 different white papers about how general fund money is the preferred way to fund higher education and not tuition, even, with a scholarship program like TOPS. Like, he's just doing what he wrote down should be done.
Right.
I looked at me like I was from Mercury. He couldn't believe. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, don't tell me you hired this guy and you didn't know what he had written about higher education. And he's like, and I'm like, oh shit. Like, you didn't even know. Because this guy was a banker. He had he didn't know. Like, to be on the LSU Board of Supervisors for him, that meant you'd sat in the suite during the football games at Tiger Stadium and hobnobbed with the freaking, like, he didn't understand there was a job to do. And it was never explained to him, look, this is what you have to do if you're going to run LSU. This is our vision that you have got to trumpet. I mean, to go from that, to Christopher Rufo on the Board of Regents in Florida. I mean, I can't tell you what a massive sea change that is. That is actually getting into the game, right? Because believe me, John Bel Edwards goes in and he starts filling the LSU Board of Supervisors up. And one of the guys that he hires is a guy by the name of, I think it's James Williams, who is this lawyer out of New Orleans, black guy, but he's one of the people that pushed the hands up, don't shoot meme because he was one of Michael Brown's attorneys. Okay.
Oh,
the family's attorneys. Yeah. And I mean, no sooner does that guy come in and they start knocking down, they took Troy Middleton, who was a World War II general, that had been the president of LSU. Somebody found some letter he wrote to the president of the University of Texas about how to integrate black kids on the campus. And basically Middleton's letter, and I'm being nice, but he basically said, look, you bring these guys on campus and you pretty much keep it separate because God knows what's going to happen if you don't.
Right. Which at the time it might be
And so his whole thing was, it comes off as racist, but it wasn't totally that. It was like, because they had a guy that like there was one black kid on campus, and I mean, he got treated so bad. He left after a semester. He's like, screw this place, I'm gone. And so Middleton, they asked him, all right, like, how do you do this? And he's like, well, you better keep it separate. And of course, that gets out. And the next thing you know, they pull Troy Middleton's name was on the big campus library. That's got to go. And they got rid of Troy Middleton. They got rid of a bunch of other people. And I mean, like, it was this whole thing. They're going to defenestrate all of the Confederate, deal. And all the donors at LSU were like, what just happened? You're crushing the tradition of the school, blah, blah, blah. And it was all like this. When the left gets their people in, they get results. Okay. John Bel Edwards, who cast himself as, conservative Democrat, whatever. They went after everything that they didn't like. It was, and LSU has been a woke indoctrination factory ever since. Bill Tate, who's the president of the school now, is he came up as an academician writing essentially scholastic papers on how math is racist. Like, that's just how this guy got, like, that's how he came up. It was like, well, you have to teach math differently to black kids and blah, blah, blah. And, well, it's a bunch of crap, but that's how you move up in woke academia. And this guy did. And ultimately, the woke Board of Supervisors that John Bel Edwards put in place gave you Bill Tate. And it hasn't been as much of a disaster as people thought, but it's a disaster. That place is a woke indoctrination factory like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
Which it's not special, okay? Like most of these, but like there are red state public universities that are woke indoctrination factories because the infrastructure was not put in place to keep them from being that. And one of the big challenges this fall for the next governor of Louisiana is you've got to clean out that, viper's nest at LSU. Right. And I mean, like, it's not going to be fun because there's going to be an enormous amount of him. Oh, you're politicizing LSU. And it's like, That ship sailed a long time ago, right?
Right.
And I think you have maybe less of a problem at a place like Texas A&M, for example, but you got a bigger problem at UT
Oh,
because
yeah.
that's a woke indoctrination factor.
Well, the thing is with all of that is that you have enough, it's so entrenched that it's anything less than total war is going to be ineffective.
Right.
Because there has to be, so if we're going to get back to the ideals, I mean, there's a statue of Martin Luther King on a beautiful one, in contrast to the ones that have been unveiled all over.
That new one that, oh my, could do a whole podcast on how awful that is.
Evidently, because we're white, we can't have opinion on a proto-phallic Martin Luther King.
I mean, that wasn't the white guy's opinion. That was I can't remember who it was. Some member of the family was like that.
Yes, Coretta Scott King's niece. But anyway, so we have this problem, but we have to be willing to fight. We have to have educated people who can go into the conversations that are happening and recognize them for what they are. Because most of this starts out looking benign, but it's not. It's right. One thing, if you don't have the concept, the overall principles that merit matters, that and the beef that I have going all the way to elementary education, where they want to like talk about gender stuff to 6-year-olds. You're not even teaching these children proper English math. Right. Our children are essentially illiterate because they can't read handwriting.
Right.
They can't read cursive. So we have this generation of stupid people who think they know everything because they've gotten awards just for showing up.
Right.
And it's completely toxic. And now these people are spawning because they're at that age and they don't even know how to unindoctrinate kids because they have never been given any information. So, these kind of interviews on the street, which is like, haha, and selectively edited. Well, more and more, that's just the average American. And it's because they have been taught nothing.
Right.
And so like, this has got to stop. Europe, we've watched go from this kind of, each nation had its identity. But there's been so much in the West kind of self-esteem issues. Ironically, as the individual self-esteem has risen, everybody's smart. But the kind of the idea that the Western ideals of freedom of speech and freedom of thought and merit-based and a work ethic, in America, we've got the Puritan work ethic, all of this, somehow that's a bad racist thing. If you work hard, it's white privilege. No, this is just an ideal.
It's like, okay, well, tell that to the Asians. Oh, but they're white adjacent. It's like, oh, now who's racist?
Yeah, exactly.
Please tell me more. I mean, I'm so enlightened by this conversation that you have about how, we have to do something about the racist people when you're clearly the most racist.
Well, and then explain that, we have a Black immigrant class who makes more money than the average American, white or Black.
Yeah.
So, this is not a race.
Go look up Nigerians because that's 100% the case.
Right. So, we have this situation where now we have just a generation of horribleness, and the Republicans are as much to blame as the Democrats. We cannot just point the fingers. You cannot have these bloated bureaucracies. They are parasites on the body politic, and they very much, like any parasite, will fight tooth and nail for survival. If you're in I'm doing a medical metaphor for all of you, but parasites are really difficult to get rid of. Certain kinds are particularly, pugnacious. They just will not give up.
Yeah.
And that is an education or a healthcare or fill in the blank bureaucrat, because they know deep down there's really no purpose for them and they're creating nothing of value. And so, and if they are pulled off the host, which is you, the taxpayer, they die. and they don't want to die. So they have to keep creating these grievances and the whatever the fill in the blank regulation is to justify their existence.
I had somebody actually explain this dynamic to me in a legislative sense. Okay, like, so you're the state legislature and you're going to do, okay, paycheck protection. Okay, and for those of us that don't know what a paycheck protection bill is, it's what they're about to do in Florida, and they've done in a few other states, which is that the government will no longer do an automatic deduction of union dues from, say, teachers' paychecks. Okay, right. Everywhere they've done this, the teachers' union collapses, because like when they have to actually go and solicit the dues from the members. In other words,
convince their members
it's not just
worthwhile.
Check a box when you sign up to be, to go work at such a school district, and then like, okay, well, you join the union, yeah, I guess, and they join the union and automatically the dues come out and you never even see the dues coming out of your bank account, when they then have to get you to go and sign up on a automatic debit form or bill your credit card or whatever, and you actually see the money, like union membership just drops through the floor, like 80%. Boom, decline. And so the teachers unions throw an absolute fit over this. Here's the thing. Probably most people in a given jurisdiction would look at that and be like, yeah, I don't think my money should automatically go to pay somebody's union dues. They can do that on their own. Like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And so probably 55, 60% of the population is behind something like a paycheck protection bill. Okay. Do they care about it a lot? Not really. You ask them the question and they'll tell you. All right, but then they're going to get torqued up about it. I mean, it's just like, yeah, for that. Well, the teachers' unions are torqued up about it. So when you bring that bill to the House Education Committee, right, and you're going to try to pass it through there are 500 rabid idiots in red T-shirts that say something terrible about the people that would vote to no union busters ever, blah, blah, blah. And they're all like yelling and screaming, and they're rude, and they're like pretending they're going to throw things, and they're making faces at people, and they start the committee hearing. And, let's say there's 8 Republicans and 5 Democrats on the House Education Committee. 2 of those 8 Republicans wet their pants. Oh my God. I will never get reelected if I move this bill to the floor. And they look around at their friends and they go, motion to table, like, are you sure? And they find there's something wrong with this bill. Some lawyer comes up and says, oh, but if you do this, you're in violation of Title 5, Section 6 of blah, blah, blah. And they go, oh, well, we can't be in violation of that. We can't amend this thing on the floor to fix that problem. So motion to table. Right. And away goes the paycheck protection bill that most people were for, and that all of the folks that put money behind getting these guys elected to the legislature were like, we've got to have a vote on this bill. We've got to have a floor vote on this bill so that in the next election, we know who our friends are and who are not our friends. They're like, I can't do that to my people. Right. This is how it works. This is how an effective minority lobby can thwart the will of the public, because most people have much more important things to do. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, well, they should have passed the paycheck protection bill, right? They're not pissed off about the idiots that showed up and basically destroyed democracy in that committee hearing. Right. Intimidated people. They're not mad about that because they just figure that's what they do, right? But this is how, like, a conservative, because we don't have any idiots in red T-shirts. I mean, we really don't. You have like some
we have polite people who knock on doors and talk. The most egregious.
We don't bring people to committee hearings and intimidate state legislators. But that's just not who we are.
It's gotten worse though, Scott. So like, I'm going to give an example out of North Dakota with Kristi Noem. South Dakota. So a supposed cowboy conservative Kristi, right? So what happens in South Dakota is that the boys competing in girls sports because they put their hair in ponytails and slap on some lipstick gets past. Not even that. Yeah, I'm a girl today. Okay, I want to go see hot girls in the bathroom. So this bill gets passed House, Senate, flying colors to stop that. A very obvious thing,
right,
that a boy should not be in a girl's locker room, should not be competing against a girl. First of all, it violates Title IX. And no, gets to Kristi Noem's desk. She vetoes it.
Yeah.
Now, why does she veto
Oh, wait,
it?
no, I have a better bill.
Yeah, it's bull. Why she vetoed it was because the Pritzkers from Chicago, the rich people
who are pushing all of this stuff.
Who,
by the way, JB Pritzker showed up at Davos this week.
Oh, big surprise.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have this fat dude in a dress who thinks he's a woman, who's also a billionaire, who's funding hospitals across the country for these gender clinics. All right? Right. And he's giving money to all of the elected officials, including the Republicans, so they'll shut their pie holes when it comes to this stuff. So Kristi Noem gets all this money, all this funding for these small hospital in South Dakota, because the population is small, so they're not going to have state-of-the-art facilities. She wants state-of-the-art facilities for her voters, right? So she takes this money from this psychopath, and yeah, the people of South Dakota have this hospital, but guess what they also have? They have dudes in dresses in their daughters' dressing rooms playing sports against them in a small, hardcore conservative state. Right. It's shameful. What she did was shameful, and she should not win anything because of what she did. Now, it's understandable in some ways because you're looking at everywhere from Vanderbilt University to University of Southern California healthcare system has these gender clinics. Yeah. I found out that Texas Children's down in Houston was thinking about doing it, but that shit got shut down once all of this came out. Yep. But this kind of thing is how the left infects everything. Yeah. Meanwhile, the billionaires on the right sit on their piles of cash and will let the free market do it. Okay. Well, the free market isn't free, first off, and hasn't been for a long time in America. And second off, money talks, BS walks, and this is what's happening even in Republican places. Yeah. So you have to fight fire with fire. The right. Democrats know that money will get them these things, and that once it's entrenched, good luck getting rid of it. Because they're going to want ongoing funding for a hospital in rural South Dakota or wherever they're doing this kind of thing. And that's how you get radical leftist agendas through in the most conservative, reddest of red places. Yeah. They come in and they intimidate, and our side doesn't want to fight because we got. Well, they give money. They don't even have to intimidate. Well, the money intimidates. Well, yeah. Okay, because Kristi Noem was more afraid of losing that money. Yes. And and being having South Dakota be blackballed by woke corporate America, than she was intimidated by her own voters. Yep. Right. And it's like, well, whatever the problem is I can fix it in 3 years when I come up for re-election again. And that's the mentality. That's what these guys think. Yeah, and the donor class who, inevitably when you're a governor and you start thinking about national politics, donors are going to be the people that you're going to spend more time with than regular folks. Okay. That's just kind of the way it is. It is. And the donor class is scared of all these fights. Okay. Like they don't want to get involved in this kind of stuff because to them, it's really just business. And, they're isolated from the real kind of raw edge of the culture because they don't listen to top 40 radio and they don't they're also older watch TV all the time. Yeah. Like they don't see where the battlefront is because they're in a gated community in a golf course, and the people that they run into all the time are the people that are at the club, and everybody in that whole group. And look, I'm not criticizing. That's a great life and people should want to have it. Okay. But the problem is that your kids are not in public school. Okay. You're isolated from the crap that everybody else has to put up with. And when you're like that, it's real easy to just say, all I'm doing is buying politicians to keep the status quo, but they don't understand that the status quo is crumbling. Right. And when they finally do get it, their response to this, because most of them are business people, is
well, shit, I better make a separate peace with this because,
Mm-hmm.
in business, you deal with what's possible, right? And you go make
Right.
the best deal you can make. Well, let's go make the best deal we can make. And the thing is like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no deal you can make with these people. When are you going to
No.
learn that? And
Right.
I think there may be, to some extent, there may be a recognition on the part of some in the donor class on the right that, look, okay, we're up against a Democrat Party that simply cannot be bargained with.
Right.
Those days are over. The age of political consensus in America is done, and we have to fight. And this is 2 or 3 weeks old, and I guess we should probably touch on this a little bit because it's coming up.
Well, we also need to get going, so let's
Right.
make it quick.
Uh, there was this letter that a bunch of donors to the RNC wrote, basically saying Ronald McDaniel's got to go. Right. And this was the whole point. Like, we are up against a weaponized, radical, militant Democrat Party, and you cannot beat that with a Ronna McDaniel. She is old news, and we've got to have somebody who understands the fight as it is and is willing to go win it. And I don't know that these guys are the majority of the donors to the RNC, mind you, but it's there. And I think it's going to do nothing but grow. Right. And so I'm a little hopeful that starting in the States with a Texas, a Florida, a Tennessee, a South Carolina, maybe after this election this fall, Louisiana could join that. Mississippi, for example, is phasing out their state income tax and turning themselves into more of a Texas, a Tennessee, or a Florida. Which, if Mississippi can do it, I don't want to hear any excuses at all.
No.
Right. So you're starting to see it percolate at the state level. I think what happened in the House with the speaker race is very encouraging. Okay. So I think the Republican Party is changing. I think it's generational. I think it's, Melissa, it's our generation that's beginning finally to come to the fore. Yeah. Like, this is the Generation X story, is, would these boomers please get the hell out of the way and stop, allowing things to get worse? Right. And I think we're more impatient and we're more willing to go on offense. And you're beginning to see that because all of those Freedom Caucus guys that held out, they're all Gen X. Right. None of these guys are boomers. Okay. No, I mean, like Chip Roy is a Gen X guy who's willing to go to, that guy's a warrior. Matt Gaetz, you can say what you want about Gaetz. He's a warrior. Like, he doesn't mind the fight. He likes it. Jim
Jordan too, even though
Jim Jordan is a Gen X guy and he's a warrior. Yeah. Like, you have warriors coming to the forefront in the GOP, in Congress. Josh Hawley in the Senate is an example. Ted Cruz is another example. You have some of these guys. Rand Paul, another perfect example. Ron
Johnson, they're all Gen X.
Johnson's more of a boomer, but he's of that mindset. I don't know how old he is, but he's old. He's older than us.
Yeah, I mean, not that much though.
Eric Schmidt, who just got there, warrior. All right. So, and certainly a DeSantis and a Bill Lee and what's his name, McMaster in South Carolina. These guys they're fighters. They're willing to go on offense, and that is the way the party is moving. Okay, which is why it's so irritating to see Mitch McConnell hanging around. Yeah. When it's so far past the time for him to still be there. He needs to go. But the party, I think, is beginning to make, some strides toward being, a revivalist GOP. I'm going to drag that back up because, I wrote the book about it. And I think you're going to start to see this in future years. It's going to happen. It's too slow, though, is the problem.
Because there's just not much time. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's the urgency. That's why, to wrap it back up and go back to the beginning, I was encouraged at the inauguration for Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott, because I felt like finally, at long last, these guys were getting it. And that they were, so all of the crap that they gave to the Tea Party people who had the foresight to see kind of what was coming and who were fighters and like, we've got to engage this. Now, finally, it is coming to all of these ideas. I mean, for 15 years, I've been fighting for school choice. It's been something that has animated my interest in conservative politics. Right. And it's finally coming to fruition. And it should have been before, but at least it is now. And I think everybody is seeing why. You know, when the No Child NCLB Left Behind was passed with Kennedy and Bush working on that monstrosity, and all of us were writing about it, and Michelle Malkin, I remember her just absolutely screaming about it, and I was screaming about it, and I was like, you guys have no idea what you've just done. And we were right, and they were all wrong. The establishment GOP was wrong. And in addition to being wrong, they ruined a generation of children's education because of their hubris, their top-down imposed solutions, and America is dumber for what they did. And that legacy is G.W. Bush's, and it should be hung around his neck because of all the terrible things that were done in that administration. Department of Homeland Security, creating the surveillance state that happened, all of the evil that was begun there, which, you know, I was screaming about, Michelle Mount, all of us were screaming about, all the things that we saw coming have come to fruition. And now we're having to fight it back because these people thought they knew better than the average, like, dummy Tea Party person who saw it all.
Yeah, well, and when the Tea Party crowd stood their ground and said, we're going to reform how the House runs its business.
Yes.
Right. What was the establishment? Oh my God, it's chaos. And you're going to create Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House.
Right. Right.
And if that's not the final, like, okay, now we don't have to listen to anything else you say because you guys are a joke.
Right.
Like that entire, I mean, we talked about it at the time. It's like, this is so stupid. Under no circumstances is that going to happen. Okay. Right. And all of these weird scenarios that they draw up, they have been trying to sell this turkey to us over and over and over again. If you don't let us run things, then, oh God, it's going to be so bad. And it's like, you know, every time we actually stand our ground and beat you, things get better.
Things get better.
And when you start to have that mentality and now you have the evidence behind it. It's like, no, I actually know this is true because it happened here. DeSantis and what he did to Disney and on and on and on. Like what was Disney going to do? Pull out of Disney World? And that was actually something National Review was hinting. Oh, they're going to lose Disney World. I was like, how the hell are they going to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
$1 billion a year, they make that in a month. They're not going anywhere. But the whole point was, like, this was the panic. You can't tell a private company what, and it's like, that is so over. It's played out. You guys have no credibility to run your.
They never think
it's 1989 anymore. It's over, and we're
wait. They don't think the reverse. They don't think that a private corporation cannot tell voters what's good for them. No, it doesn't work that way. We are not fascists. We are a republic, and that means I vote for representatives to represent my interests, not Disney's interests, for me.
Right.
So, like, yes, Disney is one constituent, but they're one business of many. And that doesn't give them the right to dictate how everything should be in the whole state of Florida.
Well, that's a failing of the old Bush Republican system.
Oh, yes.
It's just that any corporation that has a lot of jobs is reflexively correct in anything that they do.
Right.
And I mean, you gave up so much ground to the left by holding to that stupid philosophy. And really the only thing that shook them out of that, and I don't even know that shook them out of it, but what shook the party out of it was the recognition that, you know, wait, some of these corporations are BlackRock. Like some of these corporations are Coca-Cola or Delta Airlines or, you know, Starbucks, and they're explicitly left-wing. So, you know, it's kind of like the old Scanners movie where the heads explode. It's like, wait, does not compute. How could a corporation be evil? It's like, Google, like, not Google it. Look at Google. Google said don't be evil, and then they were. So, like, what are you even talking about? And now that entire, like, corporatist Republican Party it's gone because there's no evidence for it to hang its hat on anymore, right? They allowed, and it's like such a testament to how ineffective these guys were. You were the shills for corporate America. You couldn't keep corporate America centrist, much less hard left.
Right.
If you were going to shill for them, you should have had some influence on them in return, and yet you didn't even ask for any. You just did their bidding, and the rest of us, no wonder we fell off of you, because it's like, hey, how stupid are you? You're supposed to, and it's like, well, yeah, but I got, I took my bribe, and it's like, yeah, well, I didn't get anything, so why should I be joining you in this? Right. And there's an entire breed of Republicans that I think is just going away, and a lot of them have seen the light and changed.
Well, that's the thing. We can't survive as a country with those Republicans not getting it. Right. And they have to get it. So, like, if those Republicans in Texas, the big kind of corporate don't care types, if they don't get it now, they're never going to get it. The country is over, and they've thrown it all away. But I don't think that's, the signs are there that people who were marginally paying attention before are really paying attention now. And that is, and the interesting thing in places like Texas and Florida, the people coming to the state are not just coming for economic freedom. They're coming for religious freedom and cultural freedom. Right. And if they don't deliver on that promise, they are going to be in deep trouble, all of these elected officials. And so finally, the incentive structure, I think, is there, where even the dumbest, laziest, big government Republican can see the writing on the wall. And so I think that's optimistic. I came away optimistic.
Well, and when you have a positive model, okay, of a DeSantis or a Bill Lee or a McMaster in South Carolina, I mean, like, or Greg Abbott, I mean, when you're starting to see, like, wait, no, it works when you do it this way.
Right.
And this is a standard that you can meet. And if you meet it, you will get positive results, and it'll, and I mean, you'll be popular, and your people will defend you, which is something that Republican politicians have whined about for my own voters. And it's like, yeah, because you don't earn it, right? But this is how you earn it. And I think that, you're starting to see some of that happen, where you can actually build some popularity as a Republican politician. And it's not just, you're destined to be considered divisive. And to stop people from saying that about you, you have to, like, kowtow nonstop to the woke left.
Right.
There's people starting to like, no, it actually doesn't matter what the Miami Herald says about Ron DeSantis. Like, nobody cares, right? Like, the Austin American-Statesman can hammer Greg Abbott all day long, and it doesn't affect him, right? And like Jeff Landry, who's, I would guess, is going to be the next governor of Louisiana, the Baton Rouge Advocate hates Jeff Landry in ways that are really not healthy, okay? I mean, it's really scary how much they hate him. And he couldn't care less. He makes fun of the Advocate. It's so funny. His chief, and I know I'm rambling, but his chief of staff was testifying at some committee hearing last year, I think it was. And one of the Democrats is asking him, says, well, did you read the Advocate article about blah, blah? He says, let me stop you right now. He says, I haven't read the Advocate in 8 years. And the guy says, wait, what? You don't read the Advocate? He says, there's nothing in there that educates me about anything. He's like, I have no interest. That's a terrible newspaper. It's the worst thing I've ever seen. And I won't freaking waste my time reading any of it. And I mean, the whole room was like, he just said that. And I know the guy's freaking superstar, Bill Stiles, is like, I don't read the Advocate, and you shouldn't either. And it was so hilariously funny, because like, this was Jeff's crew, and they're just like, yeah, we don't read the Advocate. Like, we don't give a damn. And it's so different. You got to read all the newspapers and find out what all the Democrats are saying about you, because otherwise you're uninformed. And it's like, doesn't kill us. We don't read their crap, right? And you shouldn't either. And someday those guys are going to be marginalized. It's like, oh, that's just another blog that's out there.
Right.
Now they just lose more money than most of the blogs. Right. And at that point, okay, like, now it's over, because there's nobody for you to kowtow to anymore.
Right.
And you can actually govern, and you can actually serve your own constituents. And we're almost there. We're not there, but we're almost there. Give it 5-10 years, and we will have what we need. Now,
I hope.
The question is whether the country is savable in 5 to 10 years without a big switch now. So
Well,
that's being optimistic and pessimistic at the same time.
Yeah, I mean that's the question. But the thing is if we at least have some safe havens, that would be something.
Yes.
So on that note, I hope that you'll all like and subscribe our podcast. This is a different kind of podcast this week. Last week we were happy elves. This week we are focusing on the state level stuff and where I think the solutions are coming, because I'm hoping that we go back to a federalist system, a true one, where the state's making all these different decisions and you do exactly what the settlers did, and you move to the place that represents you and you create the kind of environment you want to live in. That's federalism.
That's it.
And hopefully we have that. Okay, well, thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. And thank you, Kate, for producing this. We appreciate your hard work. And until next time, we'll see y'all.
See y'all next week. Remember, smash that like button and hit the subscribe button as well. And make sure you follow us every week here at the Spectacle Podcast.